on Israeli citizens. Israel, of course, has launched a massive counteroffensive, largely airstrikes right now, but they're also preparing for a massive ground operation. But where is this story moving? What happens after that ground operation? If the objective is the total annihilation of Hamas, then what comes after that? What replaces Hamas? Through the course of the show tonight, I will be speaking first to Ehud Olmert, who is a former Israeli Prime Minister, and we'll be asking him what his vision would be out of the next 6 months and beyond. I will also be speaking with the head of the Eurasian Group, Mr. Ian Bremmer, on whether it is possible at all to separate the two, the terrorism which Israel is a victim of, and a solution, the two-state solution which both sides have been talking about for more than 50 years now. Is it possible to separate the two? All that and more through an action-packed edition of Brass Tacks. But first, the story on the 7th day of this war.
The mood remains tense, sometimes even volatile. Last evening was a bit scary for us. Our phones started buzzing, alerts were popping up continuously, sirens went off in several places.
ये बच्चों का यूनिट है। बच्चों से जुड़ी चीजें आपको यहाँ दिख रही होंगी, बिखरी पड़ी है, किसी को नहीं छोड़ा है और यहाँ भी रॉकेट से हमला किया गया है।
We're pulling into the site of the rave, the Nova rave, near Kibbutz Reim. There's clothes everywhere on the ground, cars marked with graffiti and shattered. You see the car seat of the baby just left in here. I have no idea what happened to them.
The scenes are out of a zombie movie. It's a war zone. And I've heard a seasoned war correspondent who, after walking there, described it as the worst thing he has ever seen.
Israel is at war. We didn't want this war. It was forced upon us in the most brutal and savage way. But though Israel didn't start this war, Israel will finish it.
We will continue to coordinate closely with Israel to help secure the release of the innocent men, women, and children in the clutches of Hamas.
Hello, Moto.
Joining me now is a very, very special guest, somebody who's been in the corridors of power, who's been at the highest seat of power in Israel. Ehud Olmert is the former Prime Minister of Israel. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. First things first, our condolences, our sympathies entirely with your people, with your nation as you go through this horrendous crisis, arguably the toughest perhaps in the last 20 years or so that your country has been facing. I just want to know, what is the national mood like right now? You are, of course, speaking to people in power. You're speaking to ordinary citizens as well. What is the national sentiment right now in Israel? And I'm also curious to know from you, because you've been in the highest office of the land, had you been the Prime Minister when this happened, how would you have reacted? Would you have reacted any differently?
First of all, had I been in power, most likely I would have tried to avoid it altogether. I mean, I probably would have formed an entirely different policy towards Gaza and towards the Palestinian issue. But that's something that is easy to say when you are out of office. Had I been Prime Minister when such an attack would have taken place with these terrible atrocities against so many thousands of civilians, I would have reacted against the perpetrators. What exactly needs to be done, I think, is too early to say, and we have to be very careful, of course, not to give an announcement in advance to the Hamas what exactly the Israeli military operation is. We haven't started yet. Only aerial attacks for the time being against headquarters of the Hamas organizations in different parts of Gaza. But ground operation didn't start yet, and I don't know if and when and how the ground operation will take place. We need, I think, certain patience to get ready and to make sure that we do the right thing against the right targets and to avoid as much as we can collateral damage that will cause unnecessary suffering to people that are not involved. It's not easy because this is a very crowded urban center, and the Hamas organization is embedded and into the urban centers, but precisely in order to protect themselves or in order to force Israel to also attack innocent civilians. So we have to be careful, we have to be very meticulous, but nothing will prevent us from reaching out for the leaders of the Palestinian terrorist organizations in order to do justice.
You know, even when you were in power, there have been attacks by Hamas on Israeli citizens in the past. Since it came to power in 2005-06, there have been multiple crises between Israel and Gaza. You know, 2008 was a very infamous one. There was again skirmishes into 2012, 2016-17. But what we saw last week was qualitatively different, because I can't remember the last time, you know, such a large number of civilians were attacked and in such wide areas, more than 20 locations being targeted, and the sheer depravity of those crimes. You know, pregnant women and their stomachs being cut open, babies being beheaded. I'm just trying to understand from you, who has seen, you know, Israeli politics as an insider and who has worked with Hamas, who has you know, has had interactions with Hamas. What were they trying to achieve? What was the objective? Because I can't see any good coming out of this other than the total and complete annihilation of Hamas. So why would they do such a thing? What's the most plausible explanation for it?
First of all, you have to understand, this is the DNA of Hamas. Hamas is ISIS. Hamas is Taliban. Hamas is Al-Qaeda. They are killers, they are murderers, they are radicals, they are fundamentalists, they are extreme of the extreme of the extreme. And killing innocent people and torturing them in the outrageous manner in which they did it is the nature of this organization. You know, 16 years ago, perhaps more, they were attacking the PLO Palestinians in Gaza, and they threw their own brothers and sisters, but that belonged to a different organization.
Correct.
From the 14th floor of the building, the hospital building in Gaza, to the ground. They were shooting them on their knees to make them disabled for the rest of their lives. And they are Palestinians against Palestinians. So for them to rape, to behead children, and to rape the mothers in front of them and then kill the mothers and the children, to kill elderly people as they did, is the essential, the core of what this organization is all about.
Let's talk about Israel's counteroffensive, and I think it's very clear. You said this, right now it's airstrikes, but a massive ground operation is being prepared for, and the military objective is very clear. Go into Gaza, ensure the complete obliteration of Hamas, make sure that Hamas does not even dare to think of carrying out an attack the kind of which we saw last Saturday. So that part is very, very clear, and Israel will be successful in that objective, no doubt. But what is unclear is what happens after that. What happens after the next 6 months? What replaces Hamas? Because Hamas came into existence, came into prominence really, because of the political vacuum after Israel left. in the 2005-6 crisis. Hamas thrived on that vacuum. What replaces Hamas, or what comes after Hamas? Is that even a question that's being asked in Israel right now? Is that even a discussion that's going on, whether in the corridors of power or amongst common people?
There are those who don't, and there are many who do. I personally, as you know, when I was Prime Minister, I was trying to reach out. I was fighting the Hamas organization in a very aggressive manner when they were shooting rockets on Israeli townships across the border. But at the same time, I negotiated with the Palestinian Authority, with the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, in an attempt to reach an agreement that will make peace between us and the Palestinians. So, unfortunately, the Palestinians are divided between a certain amount. I don't know how many of them, I don't know what part of the population they are, whether they are half of the population, mostly they are in Gaza.
Yeah.
They are very extreme, fundamentalist, Islamic, dominated by Iran, the Shiites extremists from the Ayatollahs of Iran. And there are many that live in the West Bank. Most of them are anxious, I believe, to establish a different format of relations, a different pattern of relations with the State of Israel. I think that it's incumbent upon us just as much as it is on them to try and reach out in order to establish a different framework of relations that will lead towards peace. In Gaza, the chances of doing peace are different. We have to fight with Hamas because this is a terrorist organization. They don't want to make peace. They don't want to compromise with Israel. They don't have any specific legitimate demand that can be responded in a manner that can lead into any kind of negotiations. We are pulled out in 2005 from Gaza.
Correct.
According to the United Nations and the international community, we don't occupy 1 meter of territory from Gaza, and still they are fighting and they are trying to destroy us and they are trying to kill us and they are attacking Israeli settlements across the border on a continuous basis since we pulled out from the Gaza district. So the chance of making peace with, is it possible to make peace with Taliban? Is it possible to make peace with Al-Qaeda? Is it possible to make peace with ISIS? It's not, and it's not possible to make peace with Hamas. So when you can't make peace, and they don't want to stop fighting, and they are perpetrating these atrocities, there is only one way to deal with it, and this is to fight back and to be stronger and more powerful and more aggressive in order to stop it, and that's what we will do.
So I do want to know from you, because a lot of the Israeli success in this current operation, Operation Iron Swords as it's called, depends on how contained, geographically speaking, this operation is going to be. If it is between Israel and Hamas, this could possibly get over in a few months. But if it spills over into a wider regional conflict involving Iran and Hezbollah and attackers from Syria, and who knows, what Egypt's position might be. If this becomes a wider regional conflict, what would that mean? Is that something that Israel is contemplating? Is Israel is factoring in its operational plans?
Yeah, it's a very good question. The purpose of the Islamist organizations, the Hezbollah and the Hamas, and the strategy of Iran is not completely clear. Definitely, Iran is trying to upset the balance in the Middle East, and they are trying to penetrate and spread their different terrorist groups in different parts of the Middle East. And the question is correct. What happens if, as a result of the Israeli counteroffensive, they will try to, at least the Hezbollah in the north, will try to somehow upset the balance by starting their hostilities in the north.
Yeah.
If that will happen, we'll have to deal with it. And, I dealt with it when I was Prime Minister in 2006. And we had a very serious confrontation with Hezbollah. I think that to this day they still suffer the pains of what happened to them then. And their leader, Sheikh Nasrallah, then said at the end of this confrontation that had he known what my reaction, 1% of my reaction will be, he wouldn't have started it. So I hope that they will understand that if they will try to get into this conflict now, it will end up in a very painful and bloody way to Hezbollah. So what we try to do is we try to limit it to the context of Gaza and the Hamas. And we'll do every possible effort to make sure that the collateral damage will be the minimal possible under these circumstances. When they live in a city, when they hide in the center of the urban center where thousands of people live, it's not simple, it's difficult, it's complex, it's sensitive. We'll try to minimize the number of the collateral damage, but there will be some, no doubt about it.
I do want to know from you, Prime Minister, this is my final question. You know, in the weeks and months leading up to this attack, there was a perception that Israel is normalizing its ties with its Arab neighbors. There was a lot of buzz about a Saudi-Israel deal. We had the Abraham Accords between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Israel. Morocco and Sudan got added to it. So it seemed like, you know, historic normalization of ties was happening. But after this attack and after Israel's counteroffensive, what happens to that normalization process?
Well, I think that, you know, the reactions that I get from different parts of the Middle East, from some of those countries that you mentioned, which have established peace relations with the State of Israel, I get the messages from many people that I've met over the last few years, and I have established some good relations with them. I tell them, kill them, destroy them, stop them, fight against them, and so on and so forth. So I think that the popular response in many of these countries, they are moderates. They never had any direct confrontation with the State of Israel. The blood was never spilled between us and the Emirates, between us and Bahrain. And I don't think that they want this. In fact, I believe, I don't know, but I believe that one of the reasons why Hamas was doing what they did now is because they were afraid of this new alliance between America, Saudi Arabia, and the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. They interpreted it as, I think they should have, that this is made in order to stop the Iranian penetration into this part of the Middle East and the sabotage of the Iranians against some of those countries, particularly the Saudis.
All right.
So that was something that the Iranians wanted to stop, and that's probably one of the reasons why they activated the long arm of Hamas to try and upset this new alliance.
All right, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel, many thanks for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. So the world has been watching in horror the events of the last week or so. First, it started with the Hamas attacks on Israel, innocent Israeli civilians, and now there is a massive retaliation operation by Israel. But where does the story go beyond the next 6 months? Yes, Israel's preparing for a ground offensive, but what about beyond that? What comes in place of Hamas if indeed the objective of this is to obliterate Hamas and ensure the end of Hamas? Joining me now is Mr. Ian Bremmer. He's the head of the Eurasia Policy Group. Thank you very much, Mr. Bremmer, for joining us. First things first, and I think our viewers need to sort of make sense of this. Why would Hamas do such a thing as they did on Saturday, where they went after elderly women, they went after babies, they went after young people who were at an outdoor music festival? What was the immediate provocation? Because I don't see anything come out of that attack and the series of attacks that we saw over the past weekend other than Israel's response to it, which as they claim, their military objective is to annihilate Hamas. So why would they do it?
Look, I'm not in a position where I can help you understand what goes on in the minds of a terrorist attack. I mean, that's like asking me, why would Osama bin Laden, orchestrate the killing of thousands of Americans in the Pentagon and the Twin Towers? I mean, this is a sick and depraved act. It's an inhuman act. But what I can tell you is that the Palestinian situation was becoming marginalized and desperate over the course of the past 10 years. And this is true in the region. There were lots of people around the world that said that you could not actually resolve anything in the Middle East without peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That turned out not to be true. You had Israel with normalization of relations with Bahrain, with the UAE, and with Morocco. Even as the Palestinian situation got worse, you had improved relations with Saudi Arabia, even as the Palestinian situation got worse. Inside Israel, you had enormous focus on judicial reform and demonstrations, domestic demonstrations, Netanyahu's corruption cases, all of this distraction, nobody talking about the plight of the Palestinians. In fact, the Israelis only taking more illegal land, settlements on the ground in the West Bank. So the Israelis weren't paying attention to it either. And meanwhile, particularly in Gaza, you had 2.3 million Palestinians that were living like animals, 90% without access to clean water, 50% living in hunger, no way to educate themselves and their children, no way to have proper employment and economic opportunities. None of this justifies terrorist activity, but all of this helps to explain that the situation for the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, was getting worse and worse and worse, and no one cared. No one was prepared to do anything about it. So, I mean, that's the context for what we have seen over the course of the past days.
But there is now a sort of seeming distinction, if you will, between, yes, the root cause, the Palestinian question, the two-state solution, the peaceful coexistence of Israel and Palestine on the one side. That is a long-standing thing. That's been happening for the last 50-plus years now. But the events of Saturday and the consequences of the events of Saturday, that is being framed in a very different narrative, and that is pure terror. It is terror that is driven by a certain violent ideology, which is not just about the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. This is perhaps about attacking people for who they are and what religion they follow and what faith they follow. I think those two distinctions, how do you separate the argument?
I mean, I hate to say it, Gaurav, but I think you're focusing on the wrong issue. I mean, Hamas has been killing civilians indiscriminately for a long time, but they haven't killed very many. And the reason for that is because they haven't had the capacity to do so. So what's really changed in the last several months has been Netanyahu's failure to protect Israeli civilians. That is what has changed. I mean, for the last 6 months, I've spoken publicly about Israel a great deal. No one's asked me about the Palestinians. Netanyahu, as prime minister, has access to the best border security in the world, the best human intelligence in the world, the best signals intelligence in the world. And for the last 6 months, he has ignored that. He has taken troops from the Israeli Defense Forces away from Gaza and moved them into the West Bank to deal with expanded settlements and Palestinian reprisals. His own cabinet has said, we're not worried about Hamas. They're not planning any significant attacks in Israel. This was an unprecedented intelligence failure. I mean, the issue is not that Hamas has suddenly changed. The issue is that Netanyahu has failed to protect Israeli civilians. And by the way, the Israeli people overwhelmingly blame Netanyahu for that. The Jerusalem Post, which is not a left-wing newspaper in Israel by any stretch, it's on the right, just did a survey, and 86% of Israelis blame Netanyahu for the failures here. So, I mean, this is truly landing on his desk. He is accountable for security for the Israeli civilians, and he failed them.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100% there. I don't see a way in which Netanyahu survives this war, maybe 3 or 6 months from now. No doubt about it, there was a colossal intelligence failure, and you're right when you argue that the events of the last 7-8 months, the crisis with the judiciary, the armed forces, that sort of, took the foot away from the pedal. But when you said that Hamas has now acquired that capability, now what I'm curious to know is, and a lot of people are alluding to this, is that capability was perhaps enabled by the Iranians. If indeed that is true, and so far we have no evidence of it. Neither Americans are saying that, nor are the Israelis. But if at some point in the near future they find evidence of an Iranian involvement in this, what may that mean? What are the chances of this now spreading into a wider regional conflict?
I think it's very low that this is going to spread into a war with Iran. The Iranians don't want that. The Americans don't want it. And frankly, the Israelis don't want it either. The Iranians immediately came out and, of course, called for the destruction of the Zionist regime. That's a criminal act, and it's disgusting. But they also claimed zero responsibility, and they had their first discussion with Mohammed bin Salman publicly, the Iranian president, and said they want an end to the fighting. So, look, I don't think there's a big difference between orchestrating the attack and complicity. There is alignment. The Iranians have provided military support for Hamas. We know that. But there is no evidence that the Iranians were involved in orchestrating it. In fact, there is evidence that the Iranians were surprised by the attacks when they occurred. So, I mean, we can talk about hypotheticals. If it turns out that evidence is wrong and the Iranians were really behind it, then I have no doubt that there'll be strikes against Iran. But we are not there. We're not close to there. We're not heading in that direction. If there is an expansion of the war, the likely expansion will be first and foremost into the West Bank, where you have lots of Palestinians that will feel a level of solidarity with their co-nationals in Gaza, and who are now fleeing their homes, over 400,000 in the last 72 hours. Many of them are getting killed, larger numbers of Palestinian deaths than Israeli deaths since the Hamas attacks just a few days ago. And as those numbers get higher, the potential that Palestinians will engage in violent reprisals in the West Bank against Israeli settlers and over the border is going up. So certainly that's possible. Hezbollah is possible over time, and that kind of escalation could lead to an expansion of the war. But we are very, very far from Iran becoming a direct belligerent here.
I also want to know your thoughts on what we are seeing as a reaction to this war in Western capitals, whether it's Paris, London. I believe New York City is on high alert. We're seeing this in campuses across the United States, where there are deep divisions between those who support Israel and those who support the Palestinian cause. It's got to a point where we are now seeing openly anti-Semitic slogans, pushing and shoving. Thank God it hasn't got to a violent phase yet. But what does that indicate to you?
Well, we need to recognize that the United States has enormous bipartisan support for Israel. And that is not just about political elites in Washington. That is about the population at large. There is a fringe in progressive urban centers, particularly campuses, that support the Palestinians. And there's an even tinier fringe that would use Nazi iconography to express that support. The problem is that we have social media algorithms driven primarily by Twitter, X, and Elon Musk individually that are actively promoting the worst possible hatred and the extremes and making it seem as if these are much more popular than they actually are. Remember, after 9/11 in the United States, the overwhelming challenge in terms of civil society was a willingness to treat all Muslims as potential belligerents. The Patriot Act, racial, religious profiling, massive anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States. You do not have average American citizens in this environment saying, oh, yes, we're with the Palestinians. And the only reason you're even asking me that question is because algorithmically, that tiny minority has been promoted through social media. Social media today is the single biggest challenge to an effective functioning democracy in the US and around the world. It is completely unregulated. And that is a very big challenge going forward.
So let me ask you a final question on exactly that. And I think this whole social media and what it can do, the good and the bad, was exemplified by this whole story about Hamas terrorists capturing and beheading babies. Israel, of course, some would say if you are in their position, you would make a huge noise about it. The IDF spoke about it. Netanyahu tweeted pictures about it. Even Mr. Biden spoke about it, only for the White House to then walk back on that. Do you see this war of propaganda and a war of narratives going forward? Because let's face it, I mean, Israel is going to go in and there's going to be tens of thousands of civilian deaths as well, and some of them will be young children. Are you seeing this sort of fight for narrative, the moral high ground, if you will? And how do you discount the fact that when most Israelis turn around and say, but look, what started it, all of this, was what happened on Saturday?
I've never gotten the kind of death threats from both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian sources as I have in the last 48, 72 hours. I've never seen the kind of disinformation and hatred promoted as I have in that environment. It's not because the people have changed. You would never experience that in your community, in your school, in your family. You never would. You are experiencing it algorithmically because it is the business model. You get more clicks and more eyeballs by treating human beings as products. You get more eyeballs by driving hate. I mean, we would never experiment real time on people like this with vaccines or GMO food. We would never do it. We would always test it first to see if it was safe. We are testing right now on human beings, these algorithms, and seeing what's going to happen. They are treated as the product, and that is causing much greater tribalism and hatred and dehumanization. So again, I want to be clear. What's different in this war is not the atrocities. We've seen atrocities before, Darfur, right? We've seen atrocities, Rwanda. We've seen atrocities, Haiti, Chechnya, Ukraine. What's different in this war is the level of algorithmic disinformation, which is actively promoted to make people dehumanize other humans. And that is functionally very, very dangerous for the 8 billion of us that need to live together on this little planet.
All right. Ian Bremmer, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Thank you for your time.
Good to see you. Thank you.
All right, so Israel is preparing for a massive ground operation. There are airstrikes that have been going on for the last 7 days now. It's going to be a week since the world saw those very dramatic and brutal pictures of Hamas terrorists targeting Israeli civilians, children, elderly, and of course young people who are at an outdoor festival. But how does this story move forward, both between Israel and Hamas and also in the wider region? Rachel Azaria is former deputy mayor of Jerusalem. Dr. Sarah Yael Hirschhorn is a historian and visiting assistant professor at the Northwestern University. Let me start with you, Rachel Azaria. What is the prevalent thinking in Israel? The national mood in Israel, of course, is that whoever these barbarians are, these Hamas terrorists who did this to innocent Israeli civilians, they have to be accounted for. They need to face justice. But at the same time, What is the game plan here? What is it that Israel is hoping to achieve as an objective, let's say in the next few weeks and in the next few months?
Since the disengagement from the Gaza Strip, Israel left the Gaza Strip, letting the Palestinians an opportunity to live their own life without any of our power over them. And unfortunately, Hamas took over, Hamas that now is much more like ISIS, and they took responsibility, or at least that's what we thought, over the Gaza Strip. And every so often we would have rockets sent into Israel, more and more, and it became more and more intensive. And every time that happens, our civilians that live near the border had to evacuate themselves to other places throughout the country. What Hamas did now, when they started behaving like ISIS, they really don't give us any other option but to attack very seriously and to make sure, and I think this is the objective, to make sure that Hamas cannot be responsible for the Gaza Strip anymore, cannot rule the Gaza Strip anymore, and therefore they won't be able to continue threatening our border time after time after time. What they did now and turned themselves into allies of ISIS, behaving like ISIS, is changing the rules of the games. And at this point, I want to be very thankful to the great nation of India and to your leader, your prime minister, that is very supportive in Israel in these times. This support is very important to us.
All right. I believe we're also joined by Sharon Haskell, who is an Israeli member of parliament. She's joining us, in fact, I believe, from the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament. Sharon Haskell, welcome to the program.
Good evening.
What we are also trying to understand, and I think our previous speaker, Rachel Azaria, just mentioned this, the immediate objective, and I think everyone in Israel and Israel's well-wishers are all aligned with this, that the immediate objective is to ensure the end of Hamas. Hamas is not in a position to rule the Gaza Strip. Hamas is not in a position to carry out attacks against Israel. The more longer-term question, at some point, whenever this military operation concludes, the more longer-term question is, and Israel definitely has a huge interest in the answer to this question, is what replaces Hamas? What comes after Hamas?
So there's one thing that the world needs to understand. Hamas is not a legit government. Hamas is a terrorist organization. What they have done is those sites that we've seen are the things that we've seen that ISIS has been doing all around the Middle East. This is ISIS straight on our borders. Those war crimes and crimes against humanity that they have committed against our people is something that we cannot accept. We have to completely eliminate Hamas in the Gaza Strip. We have to make sure they do not have any more economical assets, military assets, government assets. And then the Palestinian people will be ready maybe for a new leadership. In the West Bank, there's different leadership who can fulfill some of these positions, but that will be their choice of what they do with their future.
Dr. Sarah Yael Hirschhorn, because of this ISIS reference, and the Israeli Defense Forces have put out videos showing these Hamas terrorists carrying ISIS flags, and that, of course, is a very violent, nihilistic ideology. What does it say of our understanding, and this was a collective understanding in the Western world, even in the region there in the Middle East, that ISIS was finished? With the killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, it was done. There's no more ISIS in Syria or in Iraq. But this is, as both our previous speakers said, this is not just Hamas. This is Hamas wrapped around with ISIS ideology and ISIS 7th century beliefs. How are you going to counter that?
Well, I think the challenge for Israel, as well as for many other nations.
That question is to her. Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry. I think the challenge for Israel, as for many other nations, is that you may be able to decapitate the leadership of these ISIS-like groups, but it'll be very challenging really to kill the idea behind them, which is something that Israel have to consider when installing a kind of caretaker government, when perhaps working with the Palestinian Authority, another foreign nation on Gaza's border to try to maintain calm in the Gaza Strip as Gaza rebuilds and selects a new Palestinian leadership. But as you mentioned, in other countries, in Syria, in Iraq, it was possible to kill the leadership of these movements, but the ISIS idea and the ISIS movement still continues to flourish in some circles, and is, of course, continues to be backed by foreign partners that see an advantage in maintaining these groups and their ideology going forward. So it's very difficult to know how Israel or really any other nation will be able to really finish this idea of once and for all.
Sharon Haskett, I want to come back to the question of a lot of this is predicated on how confined this war is going to be, geographically speaking. If it's contained to a war between Israel and Hamas, that of course is something that the world can live with. But if Hezbollah gets involved in it, and if Iran gets involved in it, and there are fighters coming in from Syria, and who knows what Egypt is going to do, if this spills over into a wider regional conflict, that of course is a concern not just for Israel, it's a concern for the wider world. How much of that conversation is happening in Israel right now? I know that Antony Blinken was there. President Biden, in his press conference a couple of days ago, said we're moving the aircraft carrier so that Iran gets a message, don't get involved. But the contingency, if these other players get involved directly in this conflict, that A, it will drag on for far longer than whatever the operational timelines are right now, and B, it could be far more deadly, both in terms of loss of human lives and far more costlier. We're already seeing one war between Russia and Ukraine, which has been going on for the better part of the last 18 months.
I will take that if Sharon
is answering, but I think she's on mute. I think you have to unmute Sharon Haskell.
Am I on mute?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So we are already in a multi-front war. I mean, Hamas is not. You need to understand. Whoever behind this attack is, it's not just Hamas. This is Iran. Iran with troops on the ground. You can hear in some of those social media videos that were published, people speaking in Farsi. It means that Iran have troops on the ground. They have funded it. They have planned it with Hamas. The head of the snake is Iran. Iran is the biggest instigator of terror around the Middle East, and they're not afraid to use their proxies. So Hamas is one of their proxies. Hezbollah is another proxy. They have proxies in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. And right now, just in the last 3 days, they have already sent troops, cells of terror through our northern border in order to attack Israel. There were mortars shot towards Israeli towns from Syria and from Lebanon as well. So this is already escalating, and the person who's responsible for it is Iran. So we understand that the equation all around us, to be honest, in the Middle East has to change to bring safety and security. I mean, Israel is just one of their enemy, but don't forget, just a few months ago, they actually shot rockets and into a civilian airport in Arabia Saudi. They're instigating terror and war all around the Middle East, and we have to fight it together. This is a mutual enemy that all of us are sharing. And in order to bring peace and stability, we have to cut the head of the snake. This is already clear to so many leaders around the world. It's not just a fight between...
But Rachel Azaria, what may that mean? Because a full-fledged war, if it came down to that, between Israel and Iran on the one side, Hezbollah on the other, and of course with Hamas on the western side and the southern side, what may that mean? I mean, A, is the world ready for such a war? And B, is that a war whose consequences, whose fallout, both in terms of human costs as well as military costs, is that something that the world is prepared for, that the world can handle that kind of a three-front war, if you will?
First of all, I want to say I don't think the world was ready or prepared, or we were prepared, or anyone, for the sights that we saw of the attack of the ISIS form of Hamas in our southern border. This is something new. The game is changing in so many ways. And we realize that we have no other choice but to protect our families, protect our children, protect our parents. And we know that Hezbollah and Hamas, or the ISIS form of Hamas, they're allies. And we see what Hezbollah is already threatening, and Syria and Iran, they're working together. We have to figure out, and that's what our government is doing, how to make sure that we end this war with as safe borders as possible. We're not interested in a huge war. What we're interested in making sure that our children and our parents can be safe. This is not something we expected. This is not a war. It's not the kind of wars that we've been having in Israel over the past 20 or 30 or 50 years. This is more similar to the wars our parents were a part of. We didn't think we'd have to do this, but if we have to do this, we will do it. We have no other place to go. This is our country. And when you push people towards the wall, when they don't have any other possibility, we will take any measures that we need to do to make sure that we can live safely with no form of ISIS around us. We're willing to take very serious measures to live peacefully with our neighbors. We did it in Egypt. We did it in Jordan. We worked very hard with the Palestinian Authority, and we have very good relationships with them. But anyone that comes to attack us with missiles, with ISIS forms of attacks, they need to know that we'll be here and we will stand up for our rights. We can't afford to have these kind of attacks in our borders. No one can. No country is supposed to live that way. No child in the world is supposed to live that way. And we have an army, and we have many reserve units and fathers that are leaving their homes now to join the army to make sure that this will not happen again. This is our responsibility.
All right, Dr. Sarah Yael Hirschhorn, I'll give you the final word. I think what the previous speaker mentioned, and I think there's a qualitative difference in the provocation that happened on Saturday and subsequently now in Israel's response, is that in the many attacks and counterattacks, at least in the last 20-25 years that we've seen between Hamas and Israel, I can't recall an instance where civilians were targeted in such a large scale, elderly, babies who have nothing to do with this conflict. By and large, the targets of such attacks in the past have been government employees, soldiers, passing military convoys, etc. And yes, civilians have been collateral damage. In this attack, civilians were the target. And that, I think, is not something that any state, any civilized state would brook.
I think you're absolutely right. I think this is why you see many Western governments supporting Israel and saying that Israel needs to do whatever is necessary to defend herself, because this is really a global war against terror, a global war of Western societies that believe in democracy and defending their civilians and conducting war by certain rules of engagement that don't involve brutal atrocities against civilians living in southern border communities, minding their own business on an early Saturday morning and finding themselves, essentially butchered in their beds. For those reasons, I think the Western world will stand strongly with Israel, but it remains to be seen how Western opinion may shift if Israel indeed intends to reoccupy the Gaza Strip over the longer term and not just in the coming weeks to stabilize the situation and perhaps be able to extract the captives, the hostages who are taken into Gaza, but is planning a much more long-term engagement there. And I think Israel needs to think carefully about how its alliances with the West may change should these kinds of policies be pursued. The West is certainly behind Israel right now, has seen the most brutal images of Jewish death since the Holocaust, but the coming weeks and months may indeed be difficult times as Israel tries to move forward.
All right, Dr. Sarah Yael Hirschhorn, Rachel Azaria, and Sharon Haskell, thank you very much for joining us and putting that into perspective for our viewers. That's a wrap. Thank you very much for tuning in, but news and updates continue right here on the other side.
I stay near Tel Aviv, that is in the center. So I stay in central Israel.
We heard of this barbaric attack that was launched by Hamas. If you can describe the situation in Tel Aviv specifically.
Well, that day, it happened on Saturday. So we were just sleeping. and suddenly there was siren. So in my part it was just siren because the attack was mostly in the southern part. So yeah, we were staying in the shelter for 3 hours, just waking up in the morning and going to shelter. Yeah.
And what about the tickets? Because they are saying that you don't have to pay anything. Government is paying all the expenses. Is it
Yeah. This ticket is free, and we got. You can see lots of food in the flight also, and here also.
Are you going back? If you are you going to be back in Israel?
Yes, I will go back definitely. I will go definitely.
I am posted by Air India as Tel Aviv airport manager, Tel Aviv. I've been there from last 10 months now. And with that evacuation, Air India protected us, and now we are protecting our Indians over there, and brought us first evacuation flight today. All went on good, so there was no problem as such. But it is we have to be careful because something big happening. But it all went very good, no problem. Yeah, it's tense. Situation is very tense. But now it is there, we have to face it.
Live in southern part, the city is Vidrisha. It's safe, but because of him, we decided to come back to India.
जैसे ही हमें पता चला कि इजराइल में वॉर स्टार्ट हो गया है, तो स्टार्टिंग में थोड़े दिन हम एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे थे कि ऐसा कुछ रॉकेट या सायरन की एक्सपेक्टेशन बहुत ज़्यादा थी. हाइफा में कल रात में एक बार सायरन बजा था, तो स्टूडेंट्स थोड़े घबरा गए थे. बट फिर बाद में जब पता चला कि वो एक फॉल्स अलार्म था, तो हाइफा में थोड़ी सुरक्षित फील कर रहे थे हम लोग, और टेक्नियन में भी काफ़ी सुरक्षा फील करा रही थी. बट उसके बाद जब मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स ने जो स्टेप लिया हम लोग को वहाँ से निकालने के लिए, ऑल ऑफ अ सडन वो बहुत सही टाइम पे लिया, क्योंकि अगर इससे ज़्यादा अगर एक दिन और या 2 दिन और रुकते तो मे बी सिचुएशन और ज़्यादा खराब हो सकती थी वहाँ पे.
When we are cooking, we have to run away, switch off everything and run in just 60 seconds. So, and we have to find nearby shelters. So, I mean, still we are in that trauma, I think we will still need some time to get relaxed, because currently still we are hearing the sound of sirens. And
Whenever we hear any sound, it's okay.
Yeah, even the ambulance, we were just getting panicked, and even sometimes when the missiles are very close, the buildings sometimes vibrate, and that also panic us.
I'm there since 2019, and this is the first time that we are facing this much hard situation over there. And we are very thankful to the Indian government, especially the Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, for bringing us back. And we are hoping for the peace as soon as possible, so that we can go back to the work as earliest as possible. And yes, it was a horrible experience, but
presented by
best country I can say, because the idea they have good shelters and the good facilities, and our scientists, our institutions are working parallelly with us in a good manner. So yeah, we are thankful to the government, the Indian embassy. They are continuously working 24/7. So yeah, thanks to everyone. Yeah, we are very happy that we are back home. Thank you so much, everyone.
Situation was very bad over there, but of course the advanced technology over there in Israel, and because of their Iron Dome technology, and because of preparation of the bunkers in every houses, so because of that we don't feel too much worry about that. But of course, this time the situation is very horrible. Job was tremendous by our MA Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar sir, and his team, especially in Tel Aviv, the embassy. They work tremendously, very nice over there, 24/7, and we really very grateful to be this type of government in India.
It's obviously a difficult time for all those people in Israel who've been dragged into this conflict, innocent people. As you know, today is the first flight of Operation Vijay, and this is completely in keeping with our Prime Minister's vision, Prime Minister's determination that our government, his government, will never leave any Indian behind. Any Indian anywhere in the world that finds himself or herself in harm's way, our government, our Prime Minister is determined to protect them, bring them back home safely, and I'm very glad this plane load of students and Indians have managed to fly back safely.
Barbaric attack that was launched by Hamas into Israel, both Israel and Palestine are into a state of war. And today, this day is very important because after India launched Operation Azad, this is the time when the very first special flight carrying Indian passengers is arriving here in Delhi. I'm showing you the visuals from Terminal 3. This is the same gate from where we are expecting the passengers, in fact, the Indian citizens to come out of this particular airport. This day is very important because this is the very first flight that is coming. 212 is the number that is given by the Ministry of External Affairs. The total 212 passengers are going to land here in the national capital, and we are waiting for them, and we'll try to talk to them as to what is the ground situation in Israel as of now, and as far as the whole condition is concerned, so what they think about this condition. I'm joined by Rakesh Kumarji, who is waiting for his daughter, and his daughter is basically arriving from Israel. She is doing PhD there. I'll try to talk to Rakesh ji. Rakesh ji, आप मुझे बताएं, बेटी आ रही है, बेटी से बातचीत हो पा रही है?
हाँ, बातचीत हुई थी, कल भी हुई थी, आज जब फ्लाइट में बैठी थी तभी भी हुई थी, और डरी हुई तो है ही, हम लोग भी डरे हुए हैं, तो चिंता तो थी जब से ये हुआ है, बमबारी हो रही थी.
It is day 7 of the Israel-Hamas war. 168 hours and counting. This war started last Saturday, but the larger Israel-Palestine conflict is decades old, and it all started here, in the city of Jerusalem, where I'm currently standing. This is a place overlooking the old city. You can see the Dome of the Rock. It is part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, or what the Jews call the Temple Mount. If you talk about Israel and Palestine, you cannot not mention Jerusalem. So we had to bring you here today. Plus it's Friday. That means Friday prayers at Al-Aqsa. Hamas called for protests and clashes today. Israeli forces are out in large numbers to prevent that. So it's been a tense day. We drove around the city of Jerusalem. We went to the old city, the hub of tensions. We'll bring you a ground report from there. Meanwhile, top US diplomats are in the region. We'll tell you what they're up to. Who benefits the most from this war? Why anti-Semitism is on the rise across the world? Will Hezbollah join this fighting? Is this the end of the road for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? And a look at how the conflict is escalating into a narrative war. We'll bring you all that and more. Let's get started. 7 days and counting, some graphs are constantly moving up, like the death toll and the number of strikes. For perspective, let me share two figures with you. In the last 6 days, Israel has fired 6,000 munitions into Gaza. 6,000. And they've dropped some 4,000 tons of explosives. That alone should tell you the scale of this offensive. And the ground invasion has not even begun yet. What about attacks from the other side, from Hamas? Well, they've not ended, although their intensity has reduced. Border villages in Israel are still coming under attack, including the village of Zerot that we visited earlier this week. Rockets are being fired from the Gaza Strip. On Thursday, 4 civilians were injured, including 2 being critically injured. But given Israel's superior defenses, the damage is lesser. Also, Hamas is said to be saving rockets. They plan to use the stockpile when Israel launches a bigger offensive. Overnight, the Israeli military has fired more than 750 missiles. The IDF says they're firing every 30 seconds. What does this mean for Gaza? Sheer misery. Israel has also issued a warning for the people of Gaza today: leave in 24 hours, move to the south of Gaza. But it's impossible, because all of Gaza is small and cramped. Let me pull up a map for you. This is the Gaza Strip, 41 kilometers long and around 12 kilometers wide at its widest point. It is surrounded by Israel, Egypt and the Mediterranean. 2.3 million people live on this strip. 1 million of them are children. This strip has 7 border crossings. 6 are controlled by Israel. 1 of them opens into Egypt. All of them are closed right now. So basically, ordinary Gazans have nowhere to go. And they're being hit by airstrikes every minute.
I can't keep up with the numbers of those killed. Why this crime? I say thank God that our martyrs are in heaven. But we are sad. Everyone is sad for the people and the loved ones they lost. You are sad about losing your home. But homes can be rebuilt. And with one death, we will have 1,000 martyrs.
Gaza is a picture of devastation. Buildings have been reduced to rubble. There is no electricity, fuel has run out, hospitals are overwhelmed, and drinking water is scarce.
We're very worried about how this will evolve over time, particularly if the humanitarian situation is not addressed. The people that are seeking shelter and striving to survive in this environment are going to get only in worse and worse situations as time goes on.
He's right. It is going to get worse. Israel's new ultimatum is like a death warrant for Gazans. They're being told to move to the south.
The IDF calls for the evacuation of all civilians from Gaza City. I'll zoom in a second. From Gaza City, from their homes southwards for their own safety and protection, and to move to the area south of Wadi Azza, the river Gaza, as shown on the map.
What does that mean? Let's look at the map again. The north of Gaza Strip is the most populated. It includes the Gaza City, which is the biggest city on this entire strip. Israel wants the entire population of the northern region, to move south of Wadi Gaza. You can see it on the map. That's Wadi Gaza. It's a nature reserve, and Israel wants the entire northern population to go here. We're talking about displacing around 1.1 million people. They're being asked to leave their home in 24 hours. That would mean around 40,000 people being relocated every hour. It will not happen. Plus, how and where will these people go? There are bombs falling everywhere. The roads are broken. Their homes are destroyed. Their family members are hospitalized. How do you move in the middle of all of this? It's a recipe for what the United Nations calls devastating humanitarian consequences.
We need a corridor to provide medical services and so on. That's what I would ask for. One is to